Good, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Hello and welcome, dear speakers, dear guests, to this webinar titled Fit for 55 Key Implications for Liquid Fuels. My name is Mattias Olofsson. I manage government relations on behalf of the Methanol Institute in Europe, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. To start with, I'd like to remind the audience that they are on mute, and the only way to raise questions is by typing them in the question tab on the control panel, and we'll address these questions at the Q&A later in the webinar, after our speakers have delivered their presentations. I also wanted to point your attention to the handouts tab, where you can access and download the handouts from the webinar, or the slides, essentially. So that is it for housekeeping. Today's subject is the role of liquid fuels in the energy transition of European mobility. Today, our speakers are Mr. Zlatko Kregar of the European Commission, Mrs. Emanuela Satelliti of FuelsEurope, and Methanol Institute Board Chairman, Mr. Kevin Struve of OCI BioMCN. They will assess and elaborate on the potential of liquid fuels in the development towards carbon neutrality by 2050 in the European Union. The Methanol Institute is pleased to organize today's webinar. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we serve as the trade association for the global methanol sector, with offices in Brussels, Washington, DC, Beijing, and Delhi, and Singapore. Now, this is a listing coming up on the next slide of our member companies representing the world's leading methanol producers, distributors, shippers, and technology companies. Our members produce methanol from a wide range of feedstock and move it around the world and develop the latest market applications. The background against which today's discussions takes place is the European Commission's recent publication of the so-called Fit for 55 package, a series of legislative proposals designed to shape the bloc's path towards cutting emissions by at least 55% by 2030 and attain carbon neutrality in 2050. Of the 13 legislative files that the Fit for 55 package consists of, some are entirely new, and others are revisions or extensions of existing EU legislation. To inform our audience, now that the Commission has announced its proposal next 2 years, by our estimate, by Parliament and the Council of the European Union, based on which legislative procedure applies. This is due to the importance, complexity, and expansive nature of the legislation in question. Now, throughout this process, policymakers will take note of the views of various sectors to which the proposed legislation applies, and thus it is important that stakeholders be acquainted with the components of the legislation and offer their views. And I know that our first speaker today will provide an overview of the Fit for 55 package from the perspective of the European Commission. So I'll go straight into introducing him to you. Zlatko Kregar, his academic background is in experimental physics. He has worked at the Commission since 2014 and formerly in the Director General for Environment in the Clean Air Unit, and now is a policy officer in the DG for Mobility and Transport in the Sustainable and Intelligent Transport Unit, focusing on renewable fuels for aviation, maritime, and supporting the development of the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation. Without further ado, Zlatko, the floor is yours.
Yes, let's just hello everybody. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Zlatko Kregar. I work in DG Move, DG Mobility and Transport, Director General, which would be an equivalent of a ministry in Europe. Of course, I've been tasked just to give you an overview of the whole package of Fit for 55, which the Commission has Just a second. Yes, okay, slides are moving a bit slower, but okay, it works. So I have been tasked to give an overview of a huge package, and this is not an envious task because I have to present, as Matthias just said, 13 initiatives, which I just cannot in the 15 minutes that I have here. So I've decided to give you an overview generally where we are going, and then focus more on the mobility aspects because I think that's one of the topics that are the stakeholders today would be more interested in. Of course, the main context is that we have put forward a set of proposals which go in line with our climate target plan, which means that we need significant reductions in 2030, which is very quickly coming, and to become a climate neutral continent in 2050. These targets were endorsed by our legislative process, let's say it like that, and they were agreed in April. While on the 14th of July, we proposed these initiatives which are implementing and telling us how to get there, how to get to this 55% reduction in 2030 and climate neutrality in 2050. So, as I'm sorry, it's a bit quick. Just a second. Yes, okay, one click per slide, and I'm waiting. So this honeycomb is basically all the initiatives which are part of the Fit for 55. And if we would look very carefully, each of the initiatives has somewhat of an impact on the liquid fuels and the mobility sector as well. But the ones in blue are more directly relevant. And out of these, even I had to trim down and talk to you about several. So I would highlight most, because we're talking about moving to renewable fuels. I would highlight two initiatives which are a bit, let's say, groundbreaking in a sense, because they're looking into into the decarbonization of very difficult to decarbonize sectors, maritime and aviation. So let me start with that. So the first one is the Refuel EU Aviation proposal, which, just a second, which, as I said, is focused on a sector that has been very difficult to decarbonize. It still is, and will remain so. And we are focusing on having the proposals which are going in line with our climate targets, but also we want to keep the aviation market fully functioning and fully integrated for the benefit of the economy. So we need, for aviation, we are clear that we need sustainable aviation fuels. These are liquid fuels that have a significant potential to reduce the carbon footprint soon. So these are drop-in fuels and they can be applicable in short term. And we understand that for at least the medium and long haul flights, we will have liquid fuels as a predominant fuel for aviation. The issues that we have is that sustainable aviation fuel demand is very low, like a high level of competition and basically a lack of policy so far that is really targeted and that can help reduce high prices. The supply remains low. We know that everybody in the business, in aviation business, knows that the sustainable aviation fuels are such a small percentage of total jet supply that they're still really a niche market, and of course because of their high production costs. So what's the approach of this proposal? Is that all the airlines have access and increase the shares of sustainable aviation fuels at EU airports. That's important to set out. And we have targets which are both ambitious and realistic. So the shares in 2030, 2040, and 2050 have been set. These shares include the dedicated support for most innovative sustainable fuels like e-fuels, but also we are always trying to maintain a level playing field, because we cannot have we know that the situation in the aviation sector, that we could have fuel tankering practices which are anti-competitive and unsustainable. Basically, this is the approach which the details of I really don't have time to go into, but I can tell you. Slide moving, just a second. Okay, yeah, you can see it now. We will keep the market functioning. We will increase the savings by around 5% in 2030 and very significantly 60% in 2050. We will keep our industrial leadership on transport fuels, and of course, we will increase the employment and reduce public health effects. So just to fill in on this, another piece of Fit for 55 is the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, which looks at the infrastructure, so logistics of sustainable fuels, be it in aviation or any other sector. And I've just copied here a requirement that we also have, new one for the aviation sector, that our member states need to ensure that airports include the provision of electricity to stationary aircraft. This is the only part for the aviation in the alternative fuels infrastructure proposal. So I'm sorry, it's a bit slow. Yeah. My computer is. I see on the screen the same slide still.
Yeah, I believe Zlatko, you have to advance your slides.
Yeah, but I'm clicking. It's not happening. Okay. Fuel EU maritime regulation is another piece of this puzzle because it's looking at another sector which is very difficult to decarbonize, the maritime sector, and we have the same goals here, but different problems and different types of issues that we have to deal with. So we understand that to reach the climate targets in 2050, we need to be close to 90% sustainable or renewable low carbon fuel. Well, today we are at 99% of the fuel mix. So we need to complement ETS by addressing the technology issues related to fuels, which might not be sufficiently incentivized by the price signals that we get from ETS in the short to medium term. As always, we need harmonized rules to ensure smooth operations and avoid distortions in the internal market. And we need to support global measures like aviation, maritime, or shipping are another global business where we need to work through multilateral entities like IMO. So what is the approach here? No, sorry, slide. It's going so slow. We understand that we have these long lead times, that they're even more pronounced in maritime than in shipping, and we cannot rely on a single technology, and therefore we need to impose obligations on demand to promote investments, but also to avoid carbon leakage. The same issue like we have a similar issue like we have in aviation. So you can see here how the Fuel EU maritime proposal works with other proposals, which I just do not have time to go into details of, like the Renewable Energy Directive, like the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive or Regulation, carbon pricing through ETS, and the energy taxation through ETD. We are fully aware that complementarity with all of these is key because for instance, complementarity with the Renewable Energy Directive, because Fuel EU looks at fuel demand, RED looks at fuel supply, and AFIR effectively looks at fuel distribution through logistics. Let's say it like that. We go onwards. Okay. Apologies. So the approach. we effectively are introducing a fuel standard in form of average yearly limits on intensity of greenhouse gas intensity used on shipping, and requirements to use onshore power supply for most polluting ships. This is also a key for air quality, local air quality. We are looking towards penalties, and we do feel that it is a technology neutral approach. So in principle, sustainable biofuels, drop-in liquid gaseous are included. Hydrogen and the hydrogen universe, let's say it like that, of ammonia and methanol are included. We are also open towards electricity or any other advanced technology. We do have an incentive reward and an incentive mechanism to encourage very quick deployment and the most advanced options. In some specific subsectors in particular, we are looking for zero emission technology. And we are looking at greenhouse gas equivalents. So that means inclusion of methane and nitrous oxides into the full well-to-wheel calculation. Apologies again, very slow to remove to check the slide. So we are looking in our regulation, alternative fuel infrastructure regulation. We are looking at shoreside electricity, as I mentioned, because we want that ports meet these and install these shoreside power outputs sufficiently to satisfy nearly all demand in terms of port calls, and because Matthias, can you take over because I don't see slides moving. It's so.
Yeah. So right now we're seeing AFIR Article 7 shoreside electricity.
Yeah. Because I click and it stops practically. Nothing happens for 7 seconds. Okay. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So, apologies for this. We were not realizing that it is the lag is so long. And probably another article which is very interesting. This is more from a gaseous side, but it's on the LNG maritime, and again the appropriate number of refueling points need to be put in place in order that the infrastructure is there for natural gas. So just to conclude a bit on these two very important initiatives, they're like I said before, they're effectively groundbreaking because they're opening new sectors towards gearing up to full decarbonization in 2050. And we understand that we are on one hand putting a regulatory pressure, to say it like that, with two initiatives on maritime and aviation, but we are also aware that we need to be able to support the industry and stakeholders, and we have gone towards establishing an alliance. An alliance in European terms means it's a stakeholder-driven, let's say, entity, which is opening the discussion between various industries, regulators, or any other interested parties, and we're looking at this new alliance. It's a renewable and low carbon value chain alliance. So looking at fuels that will be, of course, primarily focused on maritime and aviation, but on the other hand, we understand the fuel production and the fuel value chain, that we understand that these fuels will not necessarily be only used in aviation and maritime. The focus is on their problems and and support there, but we are open to all modes of transport per fuel. So we have introduced this into the Fit for 55. This is not a regulatory initiative. This is a support scheme, let's say it like that. A forum that opens the exchange of ideas and best practices. Next slide. Yes. Okay. We are going to build it in a sense that we will have a secretariat with focus on two pillars or two chambers, but thematic roundtables can be open to more than the single items. We will steer the alliance. We will have a steering group which includes the commission. And the main idea of the whole alliance is to rapidly boost production because these fuels need to get to the market as soon as possible. We need to get renewable fuels for aviation and maritime in the next years, not in the coming decades, because it will be just too slow. So we will have the launch is scheduled to be so that the preparation for the alliance is scheduled to be by the end of this year. Effectively, in the first quarter, we will start our operational goals, and we will have fully operating deliverables in next year. So I see that there are 270 attendees, and maybe some of them are Europe-based and organizations. So we are also keen to get your contact, and you can be a part of this alliance when it is established. Still ongoing some internal commission finalization, and so we are looking forward to hearing from stakeholders here. And you will get my contact details in the presentation itself. So let's continue on some other important aspects of the Fit for 55, especially for liquid fuels. Yes, that's the revision of CO2 standards for cars and vans. Our colleagues in DG Climate Action are leading on this file. Of course, this is in the headlines, and I'm sure that I will get a lot of questions on the proposal later, because the proposal is a continuation of what we have done so far. We have been looking at transport emissions, especially road transport in this case, and they have not been following the same trajectory as other sectors. And we have seen continued growth, stagnation, but again, continued growth in the couple of last years. And we are fully understanding, and we are fully aware that we need action on road transport as soon as possible. And we need these reductions to be very prominent, because we are not going to be able to be compliant with our climate law for 2030 nor for 2050. So, of course, this is a very well-known graph, and that the main share of road transport greenhouse gas emissions comes from cars and vans, basically. So they're nearly 70% or more than 70% of the total emissions. Next year, the Commission will also look at heavy-duty trucks and buses CO2 regulation, so we will cover practically all of road transport emissions. So let me basically headline the reductions and the numbers that we are proposing here. So proposed EU fleet-wide CO2 emission reduction targets. So that means for all cars and vans in the EU per manufacturer. In 2020 until 2029, we will have the current reductions as minus 15%. From 2030, the reductions are minus 55% and minus 50 for cars and vans. And in 2035, the fleet target will be 0 grams. That means no vehicle with tailpipe emissions will be counted towards these targets. Of course, when I say targets as multiple, it's basically every individual market has manufacturer has their own specific target. There can be roughly a bit varied based on the average mass and the average share of the vehicles that they have. Do they have heavier or lighter vehicles? Of course, there are other aspects of this CO2 regulation which are always very interesting on presentations. People ask about what about low and zero emission vehicles? That means what about the difference between effectively plug-in hybrid vehicles and battery electric or hydrogen vehicles? And we are proposing that this derogation or this support mechanism still remains until 2030. From then onwards, the support mechanism for low emission vehicles within the regulation is not necessary, because stricter targets will require manufacturers to anyways offer significantly more zero emission vehicles. There's always an interest for small volume manufacturer derogation, which is removed from 2030. And we will have, so if for people who are not fully aware how this regulation works, it has annually manufacturers have to comply with these fleet targets, and if they're not complying, there are penalties based on the amount of greenhouse gases that they overemit. We will also continue monitoring real-world emissions and in-service verification. And I bolded it. I put it in bold the last point, which was assessed in detail in the assessment, but it is not part of the regulation. That means no fuel or renewable or low emission fuel will be counted. Effectively, tailpipe emission focused standards will remain in 2030 and 2035. For the stakeholders here, I'm sure this is one of the more interesting or very important parts of the whole Fit for 55 package. But this has been really investigated in the impact assessment. It was shown that it is not the right approach within this regulation. Of course, the Fit for 55 with its 13 initiatives has other proposals which are supporting very much the uptake of renewable liquid fuels, the FuelsEU aviation and maritime, which I mentioned, but also renewable energy directive. So the impacts will be that from cars and vans, the reductions of emissions will be very significant. So you can see that it will be around 50% as we are expecting in 2030 to 60% in 2035, and effectively going into the high 80s in 2040s. We will also, because this regulation will effectively increase the number of zero-emission vehicles on the European roads. We calculated very significant external cost savings in the range of 50 to 60 billion euros in the decade from 2030 to 2040. Of course, consumers will save on cost of fuel because the total cost of ownership will become more of a pronounced variable here. And we have calculated the monetary savings from application of these standards, which account from mid 500 euros to a couple of thousand euros in 2035. And important for us, because we want to keep the transition fair and just, it's also that the savings are transmitted to the second or third owner, so that all of the consumers will benefit eventually. Yes, in addition, from a European perspective, it is very important that we keep our knowledge base and a manufacturing base in Europe, and we understand that there will be no net problems with employment, other than some specific sectors where reskilling and upskilling of workers will be needed. But this is true in all important technological transitions, and we are determined that we don't keep behind our workers. Of course, reduced oil imports will be significant from a global European perspective, and this will stimulate innovation in zero-emission technologies, which helps maintain the technological base in Europe. So I have tried to keep these three initiatives really at the forefront of my today's lecture, because they're most prominently related to the sector, and usually are quite well covered in the media, so it's very interesting in general. But we are moving really fast, and we need to move fast to be in line with our climate targets. And this is a climate law. Maybe I have not been clear enough. In Europe, this is now part of the legislation, so it's in the law that we need to fulfill these reductions. We do understand that renewable liquid fuels have a very important role to play, because they help decarbonize some hard to decarbonize sectors. These sectors in transport are aviation and maritime primarily, but many others, smaller sectors, which require which have long lead times, which is usually the biggest problem, and require drop-in fuels that can be used already now or in the very near future. So with that, of course, I'm expecting that there will be many questions, but I'll be happy to answer them later. And I'm thanking you for this. Sorry again for the issues with the presentation. I'm sorry, I would have made it shorter if I knew that it is going to really lag so much, but okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Zlatko. I will assume back control of the slides now. Thank you for a very informative presentation, and you are indeed right. There have been several questions raised in the questions tab, and we welcome that from our participants, and we'll try and address these at the Q&A later in the webinar. Now, next on the agenda is Emanuela Sartoretti, Advocacy and Strategy Manager at FuelsEurope, the voice of the European refining industry. Emanuela has worked for the Italian representation of the Council and for the European Commission, and possesses a unique insight into EU affairs. And today she will be talking about the role of liquid fuels under Fit for 55, seen from the perspective of the fuels industry. Emanuela, you should now be able to.
Yeah, apparently so.
So like this, right? Okay. Yeah, advance your slides.
Yes, thank you. Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for having me. So following the presentation made by the Commission, I would like to provide you a very quick overview on the contribution of low carbon liquid fuels to the ultimate goal set by the Commission, which is the net zero target by 2050. But before start, so I'm going to spend a few words to explain to you who FuelsEurope is and what FuelsEurope characterize. I cannot move my present. Sorry, there are some problems.
Click once and don't touch.
Yes, thanks. So let's start with who we are. So FuelsEurope, as you said, Matthias, correctly, is the European association representing the EU refining industry. Basically, the association consists of 31 member companies representing 100% of the EU refining capacity and 75% of supply of fuels within the EU. In terms of employment, 41 member companies that employ in Europe 140,000 directly people and 1.3 million people along the broad value chain. So I'm going to present today a few elements connected to, of course, to the topic that you have launched. So the first is about our strategy. So the strategy for the sector to reach the ambitious target set by the Commission. The strategy names Clean Fuels for All. Then I'm going to deep dive on the contribution of low carbon liquid fuels in the decarbonization of transport, and with particular regard to the expectations that our industry has and the implications that are bringing forward by the Fit for 55. I'm going to conclude with the so-called myth buster section. In fact, our industry is surrounded by, I would say, several myths that in our view it is of utmost importance to be debunked. So let's start with some words for putting things into the context. So refineries have been continuously evolved over the time, responding to different adjustments in terms of demands, in terms of market demands, in terms of regulatory pushes and demands as well. So by providing affordable energy and affordable and reliable energy and products to the society. So with that, that, I mean that the transition and the continuous evolving and improvements thanks to research and development activities for refineries, it is a sort of a never-ending story. So the Commission is now calling anyone in the EU to participate to such transformational change. And I have to say that the EU refining industry has already embraced the challenge. So the main ambition for the European Union is to be climate neutral by 2050. The European refineries has already supported and shared the same ambition. In fact, this is so true that 1 year before the publication of the Fit for 55 by the Commission, the association Fuels Europe published on behalf of its member the strategy to achieve the climate neutrality by 2050. How, maybe you might ask? So by deploying the low carbon liquid fuels for all transport modes, namely road, maritime and air transport, and by deploying investment, a huge amount of investment. They are estimated from 400 billion euros to 650 billion euros from now to 2050. In our path, we showed that 100 million tons CO2 equivalent reduction can be achieved already by 2035, and this is the first milestone. And in order to give you a bit the size of what I'm talking about, this volume is equivalent to CO2 savings produced by 50 million battery electric vehicles on the road. So, and the ultimate objective of our Clean Fuels for All strategy is that we can bring every liter of liquid fuels for transport being climate neutral by 2050. The Clean Fuels for All strategy is not just only, let's say, a political speech or a political statement, but it is also a request of continuing dialogue with the EU policymakers. In fact, in order to attend the huge amount of investment that I was talked about before, I was speaking before, it is important to have the enabling market and regulatory condition. Without this, it will be very difficult for our sector to take the responsibility of the transition. So it is essential for us to have the enabling conditions in place. And when we talk about the enabling conditions, we refer to the legal certainty, the market certainty, the possibility to have free market competition, and also to have the remuneration of the investments. This is a precondition for every market-based rule. Again, fair competition, it is of utmost importance. Free competition of low carbon technologies. And we think that it is not wise to impose any sort of technology in advance or pre-select or pick in advance the winner of this kind of transition. So it is important to let the market be the one who decide the competition between low carbon technologies. And this is very important and crucial for us. I'm very glad to hear from the Commission that there is an alliance ongoing with the participation of multiple stakeholders, because this is something very important for our sector, because we firmly believe that the transition and the success of this journey cannot be delivered by relying only on one technology. We need to be together with other stakeholders. Technological solutions need to be multiple in order to deliver this ambitious goal. So that's why I'm saying that we are very happy to kick off the dialogue with the Commission and all relevant stakeholders, especially seeing the opportunity to take part in the alliance. So moving a bit on, let's start with some words, because we do care about words. So what are low carbon liquid fuels? They are sustainable liquid fuels from non-petroleum origin. They are produced from new feedstock such as biomass, renewable waste, and capture CO2. These feedstock are completely sustainable, and they do comply with the existing sustainability criteria set by the current European legislations. So the low carbon liquid fuels, in a word, they include the biofuel of first generation, sustainable one, of course, HVO, namely hydrogenation of vegetable oils, waste residues, biomass to liquid and advanced biofuels, and e-fuels. Low carbon liquid fuels have many advantages and many benefits. We can better understand them by proceeding in 3 different clusters. The first is about logistics. It is undoubted that they have low carbon liquid fuels have energy density, a very unrivaled one, and this is an advantage for maritime aviation and heavy duty vehicle segment as well. They are unique also for their characteristic in terms of safe and energy storage. And then another point which is critical, it is that they don't need new distribution grids or new storage infrastructure. We can use what it is already built in Europe. When it comes to the competitiveness, this is also another important factor. In fact, thanks to the deployment and the application of low carbon liquid fuels, we can concur and we can support the EU to maintain the leadership in IC technologies and hybrid technologies, enabling, of course, the creation of new high-skill tech jobs, but at the same time not causing a disruption in the existing employment environment. This is also something that we do care most. And finally, when it comes to the competitiveness, let me quote something that we have understood also for the Commission. It is very important. It's about the strategic security of supply and the fact that thanks to the application of low carbon liquid fuels and their use, we can reduce the energy dependency on third country. Last but not least, the customer's angle. In our view, this is something that it is often quite neglected, but yet very crucial. In fact, we think that it is important to let the customers within the EU, within the 27 member states, to take equal part in this transformation. And in order to do so, we need to give customers a choice between low carbon technologies. The level of readiness among the 27 member states, it is not the same. Every country departs from different starting point, and we need to respect that and accommodate to that. And then customer's choice also refers to the fact that at this point in time, low carbon liquid fuels are essential because no other technological alternatives currently exist for aviation, shipping, and to a large portion to heavy duty sector. We think that when it comes to customer, it is important that the goal of reaching the carbon neutrality cannot be a privilege of few, but needs to be something shared at EU wide level. So let's back to our strategy, and this is a chart to explain that it is not only a policy statement, but it is a concrete reality. This is an investment plan, actually, and on the left hand side of the graph you can see different technologies, and while on the right side of the graph you can see the penetration of the deployment, so the penetration of the low carbon liquid fuels into the market and deployment of low carbon liquid fuels, and at the same time you can see also the increasing of investment and expenditure done. When it comes to technology, we said before, we count not only on one technology, but we count on a multiple options, and this in our view will ensure the success of our journey. We have many of them. I'm going to quickly listen them, starting from the first generation biofuels. As you can see in the graph, they are capped. So in our strategy, we have assumed that the current cap under the RED regulation directive will still be in place. Then we have HVOs, so hydrogenation of vegetable oils, waste, and lignocellulosic residues. We have also e-fuels. And when it comes to the refineries per se, we have within them CCS and hydrogen to reduce the carbon footprint of fuels manufacturing. The first milestone, as said before, can be already in 2035. And 2035 can be the year where we really can reduce substantially the CO2 via the application of low carbon liquid fuels. So we can have a reduction of 100 million tons CO2 per year. And as said before, this is equivalent of 50 million battery electric vehicles in the market. So in order to assure you that this is not only a statement, but it has been already put into concrete terms, I would like to show this chart. This is a living map that we at FuelsEurope update regularly, showing what is going in EU at this point in time when it comes to low carbon liquid fuels projects. So this is what we have at this point in time in the EU. This is a chart showing what kind of low carbon liquid fuels projects are already in the EU. The state of maturity and the level of maturity of those projects varies. We have in the chart different, for example, projects that have been already planned. Some of them are on pilot phase, some other only on demonstration phase, but some few also at operational level. So they are really operational. At this point in time, they gather a variety also of technologies. So they include advanced biofuels, e-fuels project, CCUS, as well as green hydrogen and waste to fuel projects. So this is to let you know that it is not just only about word. Let's go back now to the Fit for 55 that was anticipated by the Commission. Our recommendations on the Fit for 55 ended up in a very thorough paper that it is visible and uploaded on our website. It is a circular, let's say, movement. It is a circular process because we strongly believe that low carbon liquid fuels will be essential to ensuring the success of either the transition, so responding to the immediate benefit of reducing the emission of the existing fleet, but also can be a valuable option towards the ultimate goal of the net zero carbon by 2050. So let me stress one element, because we see the value for the entire transport ecosystem, including in these all modes of transport. And we also believe that low carbon liquid fuels can provide affordable mobility and can support that. This brings to me to talk about the so-called no regret option. Let me explain by few words what we meant by this. It is important for the low carbon liquid fuels being 100% operational to have the market. Road transport at this point in time, it is critical. Because the road transport segment can be the critical trigger for the uptake of the market in low carbon liquid fuels. Why? Because the road segment has already a fully fledged regulation in place and has already the price signal in place. And this will also smooth the uptake and the gradual uptake and the gradual production of low carbon liquid fuels for aviation and maritime. So it is a sort of continuum. That's why we put our attention and we do care of the road transport segment. So let's move now to the package at glance. It is I moved on, but I don't see the presentation. So, okay.
Yeah, there's
Yes. So anyway, I'm going to start, and then at some point it will end up. So we have already assessed as a very on a very preliminary phase the package. It is a very exhaustive package consisting of different pieces of legislation. As the Commission said, some pieces of legislation are new, some other are the revision of the existing legislation. In general, we think that the package goes in the right direction, especially when it comes to pave the way for unlocking investment in low carbon liquid fuels and renewable energy. Nonetheless, there are some aspects that in our view should deserve a better attention and should deserve some thorough reflection and might be also improved. The first is the definition of sustainable biofuels. Within the course of the package, the definition is not uniform and might lead to, let's say, some distortion, and it is not always clear. The second element is that it is related to the so-called social dimension. In our view, there is no sufficient assessment done on the impacts and on the social impacts on deriving from the rapid electrification of cars and vans on employment within the EU, with its own differences, on the supply value chain, and on the affordability of a personal mobility, especially for those that fall under the low income category, let's say. And last but not least, the international competitiveness. We think that our sector within the group of the energy intensive industries is not sufficiently protected. And I'm going to conclude this assessment with one element that I was referring before. So we are very glad that there is the, let's say, overarching recognition within the package that the low carbon liquid fuels are essential and vital for the decarbonization of aviation, maritime, and long distance road transport. But there is at the same time a strong regret, a deep regret, which is about the CO2 standard proposal that does not take into account the contribution of low carbon liquid fuels. This is not a matter of, philosophical approaches, but this is a question of practical elements. So we really need the market, and the market that it is already there is the one of road transport. So moving on, I would like also to stress the fact that, and this is my conclusion. I said before that our sector is surrounded by several myths, and I'm going to debunk a few of them. Let's start with the compatibility of low carbon liquid fuels. Are they compatible with existing engine on the market and on the road? Yes, they are. As said before, they can be immediately applicable, and there is no need of any additional transport grid or infrastructure, new infrastructure is needed. The second myth is about quantities, by when. As said before, in our chart you have all information. Some additional information are also on our website. Some pilot projects are already there, some plants are already there. We need to move beyond, and we need to move the production at scale. The third myth, it's a huge one. Is our approach in contrast or challenging the electrification? For several reasons, we say a big no. We are not in competition with electrification. We think that all low carbon technologies have a place to play in this huge and ambitious transition. But also at the same time, we say that it is not possible to rely only on one technology to deliver such ambitious goal. As a full-scale electrification across most modes of transport does not exist, we believe that it is important that the EU regulators consider a multiple options on the table. Low carbon liquid fuels, in our view, are part of the energy mix, not only now, but also in the future, given that global-wide, the demand of competitive liquid fuels is going to increase, not decrease. So we firmly believe that low carbon liquid fuels, electrification, hydrogen, as long as other technological solutions can stay together and can live side by side. I'm going to conclude with the very last myth. Biomass. Biomass is not available, so pointless to go beyond. This is not true, I have to say. This is one of the biggest myths that I am very pleased to debunk. And I'm going to do so thanks to the publication, a recent publication that was issued late August of a report, a very extensive report published by the Imperial College London. It is a study on the availability of biomass in Europe by 2030 and by 2050. So we know that biomass, it is often dismissed for an alleged scarcity of sustainable biomass and at the same time for possible harm to biodiversity. So the Imperial College studied these questions and studied this problem, and thanks to a very conservative analysis, the conclusion is positive. So there is sustainable biomass available to support the production of advanced bioliquid fuels and waste-based biofuels. So I'm going to conclude with that by showing you a very simplified graph explaining why this is possible. So the study that I was referring about explores the availability of biomass in all sectors in the EU. So not only transport, but all sectors by 2030 and by 2050. The exploration of quantities have been considered without harm of biodiversity. When I talk about the conservative estimates, I'm referring to the fact that there is an alignment with assumption made with the existing Renewable Energy Directive Annex 9, Part A and B, and no other potential additional elements have been excluded. So have been excluded any other possible additional elements can be added to those annexes. So in the graph here you see, I'm going to move up and on. So you see the total low carbon liquid fuels, of which the green light explaining the progression and the uptake of advanced and waste biofuels. And we see that this is a simplification, but the first milestone can be already achieved with the potential availability in Europe, a very important result. So already in 2030, the sustainable biomass available to support the production of biofuels is up to 100 million tons of oil equivalent, reaching by 2050 175 million tons of oil equivalent. So they are very important volumes. Let me clarify that the red line is the total low carbon liquid fuels. The green line is dedicated to the advanced and waste biofuels. The difference you see, it is about e-fuels. I'm going to conclude with this. So the red line represents the total and the gradual uptake of low carbon liquid fuels into the market. And we expect this curve increasing gradually over the decades. The blue bar, the blue curve, represents the total liquid fuels at this point in time, combining both fossil and low carbon liquid fuels. At this point in time, as of today, is equal to 370 million tons equivalent, and it is expected to decrease over the time. The curve the blue one is declining, and this is the result of the electrification, of course, and this is the result of the improved energy efficiency. The two curves are expected to meet at some point and swap, of course, in the future. So I stop here. I talked a lot, and I'm happy to reply to your question if any. Thank you. Back to you, Matthias.
Thank you, Emanuela, for a very insightful presentation. Next, I think we'll just move right away to our next presenter. We're running a bit late with our agenda today, and we want some time towards the end for questions. So let's introduce our final speaker today, which is Mr. Kevin Struve, executive advisor at a leading global producer and distributor of nitrogen and methanol products, OCI. Over the course of his 30-year career, Kevin has held numerous positions and developed multiple methanol projects, including the production of biomethanol using renewable natural gas at production facilities in the Netherlands and the United States. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's my pleasure to be here as the chairman of the Methanol Institute to speak a little bit about how our industry is participating in the energy transition in Europe, and the fact that we have not been a major player in supporting the energy transition in Europe in the past. The ethanol industry was a quick mover, and we are now trying to play catch up because we think that there is a lot of value in methanol as a low carbon liquid fuel coming from waste that is going to assist the European Union in meeting its very ambitious targets under the Fit for 55 plan and under the Renewable Energy Directive. This slide just again shows a little bit about OCI. As Matthias said, we are a leading fertilizer company. We're actively involved in looking at green ammonia as well as hydrogen-based products. We currently produce diesel exhaust fluid and AdBlue, which are ways of reducing emissions from diesel vehicles. And we've been a leader in launching biomethanol, which is simply methanol produced from biomethane rather than traditional natural gas. OCI has 3 production plants, 2 of them in the United States and Texas, and 1 in the Netherlands. We are generally regarded as the 5th largest methanol producer in the world, and we're in the top 4 sort of category when it comes to oversight of the Methanol Institute and speaking for the methanol industry in these matters with regard to fuel. What is methanol? I mean, most people just think of it as a global chemical. It is used in a variety of different products, everywhere from paints and plastics to beauty products. But 33% of global methanol today goes into fuel applications. Principally, that is MTBE, which is used across Asia and South America and Africa, a little bit in Europe, but not at all in North America, and also for direct fuel blending. Again, most of that is being done in China. I will continue on. Just a little bit about the methanol industry. There is a large amount of capacity that is still unused. Demand has been growing pretty much with GDP, so anywhere from 2 to 5% growth. The biggest amount of methanol is consumed in China, and that is where the biggest amount of production is as well. Outside of China, the methanol production capacity is about 53 million tons, and the most efficient plants run on natural gas today, and they're based principally in the United States, where low-cost natural gas has enabled the methanol industry to quickly ramp up scale there. Regionally, Europe accounts for about 9 million tons, and the bulk of that is imported. There are 5 or 6 production plants of reasonable size in Europe, and they produce anywhere between 3 to 4 million tons of capacity today. A little bit about how methanol production works. So there are historical feedstocks, which are coal, and coal is gasified with heat to make syngas. Or you can have natural gas, which is steam reformed to make syngas. But it's very easy to substitute biogas for natural gas, and in the future, potentially to substitute green hydrogen coming from electrolysis together with captured CO2 to produce methanol, which again is a low carbon liquid fuel that can be easily transported and adapted for the needs of fuel customers in addition to industrial customers. And we see the greatest use still being in the immediate advantages of adding biomethanol, e-methanol, blue methanol to road transportation and marine shipping in order to help the European Union realize its ambitious climate goals. A little bit about the legislation, and I won't go on too much. I think everybody in the audience may have some familiarity with this already, but the Renewable Energy Directive was a way of mandating the use of low carbon liquid fuels. Rather than setting a target for emissions, the way is now also being discussed for a reduction of tailpipe emissions for road transport. It sets a volumetric or energetic target for the use of liquid fuels in transport. And that goal has been, I think, very successful in creating a low carbon fuel industry by having those kind of fixed targets. Right now, the RED II is anticipating to have 14% of final energy consumed to be from renewable sources. And we believe that biomethanol is an advanced way of producing the renewable fuels necessary for the road industry today. I can go through and say that, okay, what we're seeing is that, first generation products were used. There were a lot of double counting that was used in order to achieve targets. Biodiesel from used cooking oil was a leader in how the targets were being met. But the Renewable Energy Directive 1, which anticipated 10% of renewable fuels by 2020, I don't think really was met by a single member state, even though many relied on double counting. There were no penalties to enforce the rules, and we're hoping that the RED II and the Fit for 55 plan will encourage greater use of renewable fuels in a quicker timeline, because as Emanuela said, they are readily available and can be used. So there are going to be a need for new advanced biofuels to comply with the ambitious EU targets, and the methanol industry is one way of supporting those. This shows again about how Europe is targeting road transportation fuels. Principally, we have diesel engines and petrol engines. In diesel, we're looking at biodiesel with HVO, and on the petrol side, it's predominantly ethanol with a slight amount of ETBE. We recommend biomethanol and BioMTBE, both coming from waste feedstocks, both being advanced as being ways that the European Union can quickly address having more renewable fuels in the fuel tank for both road and marine transportation. I just wanted to say this about the biodiesel industry. Again, with the product that is coming from principally virgin oils. Right now, I think 80% of EU biodiesel production is coming from virgin oil, and the majority of that oil is grown outside of the EU. One of the things that has really happened is that there's been a growth in the expansion of soybean cultivation in Argentina, as well as palm oil cultivation in Indonesia and Malaysia. That's led to rapid deforestation, and the EU has, I think, recognized some of the mistakes they've made in their biofuels policy in the past and is taking action to correct those now. We do see that used cooking oil is still kind of a loophole, that basically it's just palm oil coming in disguise, principally from China, and not really what was intended, that it was used cooking oil from restaurants in the European Union being recycled. Quite a lag. Matthias,
Kevin, can you hear us?
Yeah. You want to
Okay.
try and advance the slides?
Yes. Sorry. Advancing the slides.
Thanks. This again just talks a little bit about the innovative technique that OCI has done in order to produce biomethanol, but it's not something that others in the industry can't do themselves. Basically, we're taking landfill gas as well as gas from anaerobic digesters using waste feedstocks to create the biomethane, which then goes into our production plant, producing the biomethanol, which can be directly blended alongside ethanol and petrol in petrol engines. For use during summertime, when vapor pressure is a bigger concern, the biomethanol can also be converted into BioMTBE, and BioMTBE can provide the same kind of renewable input during summer months when regular methanol has a vapor pressure concern in the southern parts of Europe. Overall, biomethanol is completely identical to regular methanol, and the chemical properties indicate that it has a high octane and is a valuable oxygenate for internal combustion engines. So far, we've been very successful in the European Union in a number of member states, but we've also made our presence known in the UK. So OCI is sold into the UK 48 million liters of biomethanol in 2020, and we captured about 8% of the petrol biofuel market share. We're continuing to look that the future is bright for having fuel suppliers switch from using just ethanol alone as an oxygenate in petrol, and to look at using a combination of methanol and ethanol. Matthias, you want to advance that?
Yeah.
One of the products that we've been very successful with last year, and that we're having good success with this year, is our alcohol mix, a combination of ethanol and methanol. As the UK goes into a E10 mandated environment next year, that allows up to 3% methanol with a maximum of 10% ethanol. And we've created a alcohol mix, which is 2.9% biomethanol with 5.5% ethanol. And this works extremely well with the additional petrol to deliver a low-cost renewable solution for the drivers in the UK. Of course, this product can be rolled out in any country. Every different member state has a different kind of program that they're using to support the introduction of biofuels, and we welcome that the Fit for 55 package is going to continue to promote the Renewable Energy Directive as a means of encouraging the automotive industry as well as the fuel industry throughout the different countries to look at a wider group of biofuels in order to meet their GHG reduction targets. Matthias? Again, this is just a few things that are going on in the market that we're sure everybody is feeling and is aware of from the press. Air quality has been a big concern ever since Dieselgate broke, and of course now the belief is that electric vehicles are the only way to have no vehicle emissions whatsoever. We do believe that will take a long time, and as Emanuela has pointed out, low carbon fuels are part of the solution, and it'll be a long time still before we're all driving electric passenger vehicles, and that in the short term, by using more alcohols alongside petrol in the fuel tank, you're getting the reduction in particulate matter, NOx and SOx, to achieve Euro 7 ambitions for vehicle emissions. We are seeing that Dieselgate, has had a big effect on diesel car sales. In Europe, 28% of new cars are now diesel, whereas petrol cars sort of continue to be about half of the market. But what is not being said is that all the remainder of that are not really electric vehicles. 19% of new car sales are hybrids, which are petrol and electric vehicles. We're also seeing that the car park fleet in the European Union is changing again, and countries that had relied on diesel for meeting more stringent regulations on higher miles per gallon are now moving back toward petrol engines, and we're seeing a rise in petrol fuel sales, something that has not occurred over the last decade. But it is important to realize that there are refineries in Europe which now still produce way too much gasoline than is consumed in the continent. In 2019, there were 44 million tons of petrol that was exported from Europe. All of our conversations with ASEA believe that there are rooms for improvement in internal combustion engine efficiency, and that is done principally by having higher octane fuels. By adding alcohol to the fuel, you get the higher octane, especially methanol. Methanol is a great way for improving the octane performance of petrol. And we think that, again, low carbon fuels with higher octane can extend the life of the internal combustion engine and continue to utilize the infrastructure that's in place in the European Union. I said before, again, that it is a kind of a myth about electric vehicle sales. The bulk of electric vehicles are actually hybrids with petrol and battery technology. I wanted to speak also a little bit about the marine market. Thanks, Matthias. You can.
Sorry, it's coming back.
Yeah. So the Fuel EU Maritime Initiative, we completely support that as the on behalf of the methanol industry. We think that it is something that is, again, now technology neutral by just focusing on emissions at this point, by including the marine industry under ETS. We expect that there will be a need for advanced biofuels and that some additional policy support will occur under the RED at a later time. But we think it is good that there was no feed or food crop biofuels to be allowed in the marine sector, and that the methodology of delivering fuel is going to be similar for what's done for the road transportation industry. Many people believe that the first thing that's going to happen, of course, is that LNG and biodiesel are going to enter into the marine fuel market. There is a lot of concern amongst shippers about which technology to do, how the fuel standards in Europe will differ from others set by the IMO. There is concern about disruptions because there will be unavailability of fuels at the designated times and in the ports that the vessels call on, because each member state is at a very different stage of their compliance with the EU climate targets. But we do believe overall that methanol is ideally suited in the near term to promote the energy transition for the EU shipping industry, with first beginning with fossil methanol, which has a lower carbon footprint than traditional diesel, and then moving toward blue methanol, where you're using carbon capture as part of the production process, through to green and e-methanols developed over time. And we're starting to see our first movement in that regard with the announcement by Maersk that they are building 8 dual fuel container ships, and that their aim is to run those vessels on carbon neutral methanol by 2025. Matthias? So just in conclusion, biomethanol and BioMTBE, which are advanced, made from waste feedstocks, are readily available liquid fuels that can meet the RED II and Fit for 55 targets, principally in the petrol market. We do see that biodiesel continues to just become economically unattractive due to the fact that so much of the commodities are imported from abroad. Again, used cooking oil coming from China, virgin oils coming from South America. And we do see that with the use of biomethanol, that petrol prices will come down versus diesel. Biomethanol and BioMTBE are also very good alternatives for countries that haven't even begun to do any ethanol blending. If you look at places like Croatia and Slovenia, Malta, Cyprus, where they don't even really blend ethanol at this time and are not in any way compliant with RED I targets, much less beginning to look at RED II targets, that biomethanol provides a very quick way of meeting their environmental goals. And of course, the UK has just moved to E10, mandating that, and joined only a handful of countries in the European Union with a 10% target. We're of course advocating that it's no longer ethanol as the only player in town. Biomethanol is a better, more advanced waste-based way of complying with environmental targets, and that we can look at A20 and GEM fuels as being low carbon fuels that are readily available to participate in meeting the Fit for 55 program. Overall, methanol fuels could be used in the very short-term, immediate future for road transportation, and then as electrification begins to kick in, methanol can then be switched over to continuing to provide decarbonization for the marine industry over the longer term. And as Emanuela pointed out, there are certainly a large amount of biomass sources available for the biomethane to be used as a feedstock to create the biomethanol as a low carbon liquid fuel. Thank you very much, and I look forward to also answering some questions.
Right, fantastic. Thank you all still for staying with us, despite having extended the webinar a little bit. We will try and limit the questions to about 10 minutes, if that's okay with the speakers, instead of 15 to 20. And I've been sort of in the process of trying to compile together questions along similar themes so that we could have fewer questions in order to save time. And I think I will start with a question for Emanuela. because and it seemed to be centered on this key argument against liquid fuels, which is affordability. I mean, how do you impact estimate the impact of the legislation proposed by the Commission concerning the business case for production and sales of low carbon fuels?
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. And so I'm going to take this question very seriously. Our friend said, what about the other myth about the fact that low carbon liquid fuels are expensive? I would say you are right. It is not a myth. It's the reality. And spamming from the type of low carbon liquid fuels, the cost is higher 2 or 3 times more the current fossil fuel that we can find in the petrol station. So the cost is really not affordable as of today. That's why we say it is important to create the market condition in order to have an alternative, because the immediate benefit of the application of low carbon liquid fuels in terms of environmental benefit, it is there without any other additional effort. So we believe that the transition, which implies also the emission from the existing fleet, needs to be addressed at some point, because in the future, of course, a big part of the road market will be electrified, and we are completely happy with that. But what about the existing fleet? The existing fleet needs also to be somehow resolved and considered. It is true that low carbon liquid fuels are now expensive, more than the current fossil fuel based, but as long as you create the market and you put into place the market condition, then building up the production will bring the cost of the production down via the economy of scale. So this is something that should also bear in mind. As of today, many other technologies are not affordable. As of today, only fossil fuel is affordable, but we are all in the agreement that we need to move and step away from the fossil production and the fossil consumption to something different. So with that in mind, I think that we can open the window to different low carbon fuel solution, and only via the open competition on the market we can have competitive costs. I hope to have addressed your question, and back to you, Matthias. And anyway, my email address is visible in the PowerPoint presentation, so happy to follow up with anyone that needs. It is important to do so. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Emanuela. I think because Zlatko, the question to you, because that ties into what Emanuela was saying, and also in her presentation, that the integration of liquid fuels doesn't necessarily have to prohibit or distract from the integration of electricity into the mobility mix. So my question to you is, and also during your presentation, you said that in the maritime sector, we shouldn't depend on one technology solution. Should we, in terms of road mobility, only depend on electrification?
Thanks for the question. Yes. Well, let's phrase it like this. In the maritime sector, the challenge is quite it's quite a difficult challenge. And when I said that all technologies, of course, because we don't have a proper and a full zero emission alternative for the maritime technology. And when I say full, it's barely on the horizon, let's say it like that. So we need to account for what we've got in the coming decades. And therefore, of course, any kind of liquid fuels, but also gaseous fuels in the maritime sector, specifically biogaseous fuels, the renewable gaseous fuels, they definitely have a role to play. When it comes to the road transport sector, we are seeing what is an accelerated shift already today. So I've seen the slides from Kevin actually is saying, for instance, that the diesel share of new vehicles has dropped to 28%, and basically since that data point just continued dropping, and we are seeing an accelerated shift towards zero emission alternatives. We are not prescribing a single technology. It's still relatively early that we can see a possibility that hydrogen fuel cell vehicles take off massively. So these would also comply with the regulation of 2035 completely. On the other hand, there's always the discussion on the affordability and the price. I can assure you that we have looked into that in our impact assessment, and the conclusions are that over time, and 2035 is both soon and still some way off. So at that time, the market will change significantly, and the European industry is increasingly changing its value chains, automotive industry. And already we are seeing significant proliferation of more affordable models, and we can expect that even more coming years.
I see. Thank you. I'm sure other speakers might want to react to that, but first let's take a look at the questions for you. Kevin seemed to be centered on supply. To your estimate, will supply of carbon neutral or low carbon liquid fuels be adequate in the near future to supply the EU fuel market with large volumes?
Well, the answer to that is, of course, there's more than enough availability of biomethane today in order to significantly increase the quantity of methanol that would be blended into fuel. In Europe, there's approximately 20,000 anaerobic biogas digesters and at least 725 major biomethanol or biomethane installations. It doesn't take that many to create the quantity of biogas that can then just be rolled through a methanol plant to create a very safe, transportable, and low-cost biofuel. Another thing that is unique to biomethanol and biomethane is the fact that the scientists have now assessed a negative carbon intensity to biomethane that comes from agricultural manure. Manure is a major source of methane emitted into the atmosphere. Agriculture is a major source of methane emissions. By capturing that methane gas into biogas and then having that quickly put into a liquid form through a methanol plant and allowing it to be dispersed safely and efficiently throughout the European fuel distribution system is a great way of dramatically reducing carbon in a short amount of time. That's not possible with products like ethanol. It is very difficult to have a huge number of CNG and LNG trucks put onto the market in a quick amount of time. But tomorrow, we have a 1 million ton facility in the Netherlands that could be converted to completely running on biomethane overnight. And all of that production, 1 million tons, could be introduced into the European fuel supply. Mm-hmm. The bulk of methanol in Europe is now sort of being catered by lower cost suppliers from the Middle East because the carbon border tax isn't in place. And European production is looking for ways to differentiate itself by using biomethane as a feedstock instead of traditional natural gas. But we need policy support to say, okay, this advanced biofuel is what we want, and we would like to have this done, because the E10 fuel standard is going to limit only 3% biomethanol in the fuel tank. An
Right.
A20 fuel standard would allow up to 20% alcohol, either ethanol or methanol.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. We are very much past the time that we intended to conclude the webinar, but I just wanted to close with one final question, because I see some in the chat to Zlatko of the European Commission concerning a degree of harmonization in terms of the Fit for 55 package. There seems to be a sort of different way of essentially accounting for greenhouse gas emissions between different files. You see, for the FuelEU Maritime, you measure not only CO2 but also greenhouse gases, and you will measure on a well-to-wake or a life cycle basis. But the same does not apply to ETS or the taxonomy, or, for example, the Renewable Energy Directive. I guess the question would be, Zlatko, could you elaborate on this, and do you think that there is a degree of harmonization required now in the process of refining these proposals?
Thanks for the question. Well, you are correct, and the colleague who asked the question is correct. There are various nuances in the methodology or the accounting for various proposals, but it boils down to the fact that the proposals cover very varied sectors and very varied just applications. So in a sense, in one sector, you can use one type of accounting, let's say it like that, while in the other that would be completely inappropriate. It is also linked to, for instance, compliance and what kind of provisions do we have on penalties. The best example is that I often use actually is in the CO2 target fleet emission standards for vehicles. The fuel methodology would always be different from what we have now. We have a finalized product and you are measuring its emissions. And that has a clear line of compliance, and we know who is responsible for the compliance. Is the producer. It's a product. In different sectors, you have the energy sector. You have a completely different market and way of how the legislation works. So of course, you said, will there be room for fine-tuning? I think you mentioned at the beginning that these are proposals which are going to co-decision. So there are 13 of them which will be in various stages of co-decision, and I'm sure that colleagues who are directly working on some of these will get questions about harmonization and cross impacts. And these are very valid questions, and the co-decision process will fine-tune them and come up with a final legislation which will account for also views from the stakeholders, member states, and the elected parliament.
Right. Yes, and we will at the Methanol Institute keep monitoring and participating in these developments of the proposals moving forward through co-decision, and report on those to our members. I would like to conclude today's session now. I would like to thank all of the attendees for staying on with us this long, and apologies for any inconveniences associated with technical difficulties. Also, I'd like to thank our speakers today, Zlatko, Emanuela, Kevin. Much appreciate your insightful presentations today. I think it's safe to say that we didn't get a chance to answer all of those questions, but I am sure there will be a possibility for those of you whose questions weren't answered to follow up directly either with us or with the speakers. I'm sure the presentation is available for download under handouts and includes their contact details. Again, thank you very much for taking part today, and I look forward to seeing you next time in our next session of the webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.